Okay. Hope everybody's well out there today on this Thursday. In this podcast for September the 14th, 2023, we're going to be talking about political and civil rights in the 1920s. It's going to be a comparative analysis, and we're going to be taking a look at the women's suffrage movement and the different stories that were involved in that era and time. And it's always important to have a historical context to the current paradigm that we're living in. So let's take a look. Now, this report was done, written by me. This is a scholarly piece, and this is going to be I think I have one more in a series of pieces that I'm going to be doing. Ultimately, though, I do have the content that I'm putting together for reparations, but this is just a part of it. The next thing that I'm going to do is just go over this information. So let's begin. And before I go over that, make sure you check out my new Telegram stream. It's a stream of the latest news headlines that are important, that I believe are important, and that we should be paying attention to as we move into 2024. Make sure you check out some of my link tree. So that's linktr.ee /kmtcminds. And I'll have a link of that in my Twitter profile. I have that link links to my Telegram. So thank you for checking that out and listening in. And let's get right to it. So the early 20th century marked a significant period in the struggle for political and civil rights in the United States. The ratification of the 19th Amendment in 1920 granted women the right to vote, while the African American community gained the right to vote through the 15th Amendment in 1870. However, despite these advancements, social equity remained elusive. This essay will compare and contrast African American political and civil rights with those of women, focusing on the constitutional nature of their rights, the methods employed in their fight for political rights, the challenges faced, and the relationship between social pressures and political rights. Constitutional rights. Constitutional nature of political rights. The U.S. Constitution was crucial in defining political rights for African Americans and women. The 15th Amendment secured the voting rights of African American men, prohibiting racial discrimination at the polls. And that citation is Matterson and Trotter, 2018. However, various state-level discriminatory practices such as literary tests, poll taxes, and violence hindered their exercise of this right. One of those violent events occurred in Chicago when a young man, George Stogber, threw a rock at Eugene Williams, who hit him in the head and caused Eugene to drown while swimming. So no justice was served, and this was what spawned the racial riot or race riot, injuring hundreds, with over 38 people killed and most of the property lost by African Americans. On the other hand, the 19th Amendment guaranteed women's right to vote, finally recognizing their political agency. Nonetheless, similar to African American men, women face challenges fully exercising this right due to cultural and social barriers. From 1885 through 1946, black women were still victims of racial terror as well, despite the primary target being black men. Lynchings of black women during that era violated their 14th and 15th Amendment rights, the right to due process, and the right to life, liberty, and property. The political aspect of inequality is essential to understanding how far we have come as a country and where we want to go. So that's the next section is the political rights of African Americans. The fight for political rights and challenges faced by both African Americans and women employed different strategies in their quest for political rights. African American activists like W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington utilized legal challenges and grassroots movements to combat voter suppression and promote equal political representation. One example of Washington's approach can be seen in his efforts to establish and support the Tuskegee Institute in Alabama. The institute aimed to provide vocational training and education to Black students, equipping them with practical skills and knowledge to improve their economic prospects. Washington believed African Americans could attain social and political progress through education and economic self-sufficiency. However, these efforts faced considerable opposition from white supremacist groups and discriminatory state legislations. Similarly, women's suffrage movements led by figures like Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton organized protests and lobbied for constitutional amendments and engaged in civil disobedience. Political rights of women. In 1872, Susan B. Anthony and a group of women in Rochester, New York, tried to vote in the presidential election, even though women did not have the legal right to vote. Their civil disobedience aimed to bring attention to the cause of women's suffrage. However, Anthony was arrested by federal marshals soon after casting her vote. The trial, United States versus Susan B. Anthony, became significant for the women's suffrage movement. Unfortunately, Anthony could not testify or address the biased judge and jury who held opposing views toward her and the suffrage movement. Despite the challenges, Anthony's actions helped raise awareness and set the stage for future progress in women's rights to vote. Women encountered resistance from those who believed their political participation would undermine societal norms and values. Challenges both groups face. Challenges with civil rights and social pressures. Despite gaining political rights, African Americans and women face significant challenges regarding civil rights and social acceptance. African Americans experience systemic racism through the implementation of Jim Crow laws, which legalized racial segregation and stripped away their rights and dignity. The Ku Klux Klan and other white supremacist groups targeted African Americans, perpetrating violence and discrimination. The 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution, ratified in 1865, abolished slavery and involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for a crime. However, despite the legal abolition of slavery, African Americans and women still face significant challenges and forms of discrimination in 1924. One of the primary ways for the white supremacists to control the formerly enslaved Black people was lynching. Journalist Ida B. Wells fought for the federal anti-lynching laws to help in the movement to help stop racial violence. Ida B. Wells was a pioneer in helping end the injustices faced by African Americans and women. For African Americans, racial segregation and systemic racism were deeply entrenched in American society. Jim Crow laws were widespread, imposing racial segregation in public facilities. Transportation and education groups used the process in their fight for political rights and challenges that they faced. In comparison, women confronted social pressures that reinforced traditional gender roles and limited their economic independence and social mobility opportunities. While there were injustices that both groups faced, the level of hatred was different depending on the group's race. It is essential to acknowledge this fact to put the discussion again in the proper context. So in conclusion, in the years leading up to 1924, The struggle for political and civil rights in the United States saw progress for African Americans and women. The constitutional recognition of their political agency marked significant milestones, with African American men gaining the right to vote through the 15th Amendment and women securing the right to vote through the 19th Amendment. However, these advancements did not automatically translate into social equality. Both groups faced challenges, including discriminatory practices, social pressures, and limited civil rights. Racism, gender stereotypes, and cultural resistance perpetrated the marginalization of African Americans and women. Thus, political and social rights were intricately connected and deeply influenced by mainstream ideas of race, gender, and social class. Through continued activism and collective efforts, progress towards social equity can be achieved in future generations. So my afterthoughts of this paper that I did, this is an earlier paper I did, is just, some things have changed for the better, and I will acknowledge that, but some things simply have not. And if we are to continue to improve and be good, human beings that care about more of the collective well-being of humanity and less about competing against one another for resources or certain positions in this society, what we should do is continue to form bonds that are productive and are very progressive in mind in regards to those who have and those who do not have. This is an important thing. And as we see more challenges take place, obviously the move towards the digital currencies and CBDCs and things of that nature, we have to always keep in mind the real value. And the real value is in relationships, people, and nature. And, I think about someone who has let's say they have a home, they have hundreds of trees in their land. And, instead of just being greedy with that land, having someone who knows how to cut trees and someone who knows how to build homes that live on that land, and other people cooperate, right? And they're able to have a home now. Normally they'd be homeless, right? But you better believe there's homeless people in the United States that have a very high degree of skill, but maybe they've just haven't maybe had that opportunity, or they're not in an area where that's possible, or they don't have the resources to get those opportunities. Some people have been broken down by this society, okay, and they have not. They're in such an emotional and psychological trauma that they're not able to come out of that trauma long enough to be able to be productive citizens, right? Maybe they don't have the resources to, cut their own hair. They don't know how to cut their own hair, or they don't have the clothing, or maybe they do have the clothing. It's possible to get access to clothing, but you still need to also develop the communicative ability, the ability to fine tune a resume, things of that nature. So the thing that I think about is living in a world where no matter what level or socioeconomic status you are, you can still thrive. And I believe we do have the resources on this planet for everybody to thrive and no one to live, in quote unquote poverty, which poverty is an outer outlying thing that society again has put on us since birth. That if you're at this economic class, you're this level, and this person's that level, and this multi-level pyramid. Okay, so at the end of the day, we're getting to that breaking point of humanity not being able to go. I believe humanity can't go backwards anymore. I think that, moving forward, I hope that there are innovations all the way up until 2030 that innovate things in a way where everybody can thrive and no one feels without, or like they can't afford dental work, or they can't afford health insurance, or the family has a disaster and they can't afford to work their way out of a disaster. The issue in the Americas is that the descendants of slaves, the foundational Black American descendants of slaves, never were paid for what they gave, which is they gave America the greatest gift you could ever give a country, which is a nation. And so when that debt is paid, things could be more balanced in the society. And again, the fortune or the good karma can begin to happen in America, and we can see the balance take place in that regard. So I'll have more on reparations in the future. I see a lot of arguments out there, and I'm gonna go over those arguments in a very in-depth report. I don't know exactly when I want to aim to release this on a certain date, and that's just to help with the energy of making reparations a reality. It's really being talked about, and we're living in a great time to make that happen. So in regards to this paper, in terms of critiquing it, because I don't ever want to present information that is one-sided, or like I can't make a mistake or anything like that. But I would say this paper is pretty good. I would, still need to work on some things, but there's been a lot of course, injustices that everyone's faced. I am concerned about, while it is good to empower any gender, I think it's also smart to, again, balance, right? To have a career, but also to never forget about the family. Why do people get married? Primarily in the past, it was because of children, and to have healthy, happy adults that have the benefits of two parents in the home. Statistically, we know that as a fact, children do better with two healthy parents in the home. They get along. Okay, but some of us have lost sight of the power in marriage. But again, it's still, it comes down to balance. So I hope you enjoyed this little podcast.
Rubber bands, we can't get along, and I overstay. Skinny steady popping like the for the dollars. I'm too focused on the commas, and you always with the drama. Always got a problem, but it's never an issue. Way too blessed and stressed, using money like tissue. Tears of joy, every night a celebration. Hey, go deck for my dedication. I just might obliterate 2021. 2020 pandemic still going dumb. My heart been through so much. That bit almost numb, still I snap on every song, so I don't snap on anyone. Go so hard I break a thumb, broke a leg in the